Three, two, one. No, that was terrible.
The lag is significant, I think, is the problem here.
What a real professional operation going here.
Yeah.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Pat and Paul Show. I am Paul Michelotti, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Pat McLaughlin.
Paul, how you doing?
This is our first time doing pure audio here. We're at part 3 in our 2-part series on cultivating a philosophy of development. A lot of heat around the first 2 videos. And you said to me, Paul, we have got to bring in this Edward guy. He's coming in with the hot concepts, a lot of hot takes. We got to bring him in on the show. So
he's blowing my slack up. I'm glad we got him. Happy we got him
here. We are here with Edward.
I think his name's
Edward. Pronounce
Edward.
your last name. Do you pronounce the entire shebang-a-bang?
I was interested to see if you were going to try it on your own or not. My name's Edward Modecki-Mellett.
Yeah.
Yep. The whole thing goes. It's actually phonetic, so it shouldn't be that hard.
No, I think I would have been able to do it. I just wasn't sure.
Yep.
The hyphen in there, what protocol was.
Yep,
when you were filling out your standardized test forms when you were a kid, how deep did you get into the name? Did you put the dash? Did you even get to the dash?
You're not really allowed to put dashes on a lot of forms, so you're just supposed to put a space instead.
Gotcha.
Or run it together. I always ask the proctor. It creates some interesting problems. My name doesn't fit on credit cards anymore because they changed the character count a few years ago.
Nice.
Actually decreasing it instead of increasing it for some reason. So that was fun.
That's a thing, for sure. Well, the reason we have Edward here with us is because he introduced us, Paul and I, to a term we'd never heard before, and that's the 501 developer. Edward, do you want to give us a little overview, kind of how what that is, how you came across it, and maybe we can talk on that and see how we can apply it to kind of our development philosophies.
Yeah, so I encountered this term, the 501st Developer Manifesto is actually the thing I encountered first. It was a post on Hacker News. I think it was back in 2012 or early 2013. And it just kind of created this giant flame war in a lot of IT blogs at the time.
Which is interesting. It's usually hard to create a flame war in that sort of a forum. So very level-headed group of individuals. Yeah,
I mean, I've seen a few different concepts come up that have kind of created this big back and forth where a lot of people have a big reaction and everybody comes in and says a bunch of things about that one concept, and a lot of them are completely opposed to one another. So this is the second or third time I've seen this on Hacker News in the last 2 or 3 years. Just to get into the concept, essentially a 501 developer is somebody who leaves at 5:01 p.m. and doesn't think about their job until they come in at 9 a.m. the next day. They're essentially the opposite of people that write blogs in their free time, make podcasts like this one,
Hot take right off the bat. I like it.
I'm going to close this laptop right at 5 o'clock, so this podcast ends at 5.
And yeah, that's exactly the whole thing, going to user groups and that attending events, coding on your own, having your own website really, I think falls anything that you would do after work for yourself as far as coding goes, is sort of what this term became. Now, when it was originally proposed, it didn't mean exactly that, but I think that the connection was super strong. And so the reason that we started talking about this term is because in the last video you guys posted, you mentioned the guys that go home at 5 and eat popcorn. And don't put much enthusiasm into their work and don't want to learn and don't want to improve. And that's kind of where the term ended up for a lot of people. But the greater term and the people that I see defending that behavior of going home and not thinking about it, means something I think slightly different. That's why I wanted to talk about it today, because that concept and kind of the distinction I think is extremely important.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Edward. I really would. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm kind of glad you brought it up because I had to review the our last video, and after reading it in the context of, say, that manifesto, yeah, I could definitely see how there's a lot of nuance in there. It's not really one or the other. At least that's my take. The other thing I thought of is I wish I'd wrote that manifesto. For better or worse, man, that thing had some heat around it. Not that I agree with everything in it, but man, I wish I could have authored something like that because that was powerful. So
Yeah.
one thing I wanted to ask you, since you had kind of brought it up, is where do you see the nuance in it? Because there's no way that someone who is an incredible developer and really passionate about their job could go home at 5 o'clock, right? And when they come back at 9 o'clock, they could be killing it, inspiring people, creating enthusiasm, as opposed to someone who really, it's not that you're thinking about your job, it's how you proceed in the hours that you're at your job. Is that fair to say? What's your thoughts on that?
So I kind of see like the concept of a 501 developer, at least as the term was presented as a pejorative term by the person who coined it. If you go back onto the web archive and look at the manifesto and then look at where the blog that guy's referencing in order to create it, it was a pejorative, like essentially a blog post that says, I don't have time for people who go home at 5 and don't put in the work. And I think that the response is slightly different. It's an advocate for a work-life balance, essentially, that I'm already putting in essentially a third of my work week, 8 hours sleeping, 8 hours free time, 8 hours at work to this thing. So it was intended to be a pejorative term, and so the manifesto is intended to be a somewhat, or actually an extremely tongue-in-cheek, like repurposing of that term. And I think the key here is that the reason it's a pejorative in the first place, and the reason we make comments like the people who go home at 5 and eat popcorn and don't like improve, is because going home at 5 and not thinking about work until you come back the next day is 100% of the people that are bad at their jobs and don't care do that. And so therefore, it's a trait that we can associate with 100% of those people, but not 100% of those people that do that thing are also bad at their jobs. So in the Venn diagram, it's flipped. If you look at the group of people that are bad at their jobs, that circle is inside the circle of 501 developers, as opposed to being the same circle or the circles being flipped where some bad developers go home at 5. And I was having this conversation, a follow-up conversation with someone else that was in our group chat, and we basically had this back and forth where his understanding of the term, which he had just learned, having read the same blog articles that I had posted along, essentially, his understanding was an initial extreme perception of negative traits associated with just 501 developers, people who go home at 5. But when we talked about it, he was still advocating for a work-life balance. And I think that focusing on that idea, that concept, essentially is the wrong concept to focus on. Instead, it should be about enthusiasm. The complaint is that against developers that are never enthusiastic, and so we immediately go to the opposite for developers that are always enthusiastic. But it should be good enough that the developers are enthusiastic during the period of time in which they need to be. And that should be the end goal. You don't need to be enthusiastic all the time, you just need to be enthusiastic in the moment when it's necessary. And so if you are enthusiastic all the time, you automatically meet that goal. And so you can make that cutoff. And especially in places like Hacker News, discussions like that, it's easy to make the assumption that being enthusiastic all the time is the best thing, because the people that are on Hacker News are enthusiastic all the time. Otherwise, they wouldn't be on Hacker News talking about tech in their free time.
I think brings up so many good points, actually. I don't know where we should start there. One thing is, I think maybe could we define what we believe is what enthusiastic means? Because are we correlating that with being a good developer? Like how are we defining like what we say is enthusiastic as far as how it relates to the tool belt that you need to be a good developer?
I feel like to some extent it's the difference between just doing a job and trying to do a better job almost. And that's kind of how I see it. And like whether that job ends at 5 for you or whether you decide to, spend your entire night thinking about your job, you can still be always trying to elevate your position. So if you look at like a line chef or somebody who's chopping onions, and they could go in every day and they could just chop those onions and they could do the same onion chop every single day, or they could be going in every single day trying to learn more and trying to work with the other chefs. And this might not be a great example because I've heard that entire environment is extraordinarily hostile.
Heard they fork stab each other any chance they get.
Right, which happens in some development environments as well. It's just the forks are on GitHub. You're coming in, even if it's from 9 to 5 or whenever it's from to and from, you're coming in and every day you're trying to elevate what you're doing. For myself, I was looking through that list, and at the point that I'm at in my life, like I was definitely what I would consider, I don't know if there's a term for the opposite of the 501 developer, maybe the 24/7 developer. Where like it was my entire thing. I would be at work from 9 to 5 or from 6 to 3 or whenever I would come and go. And then at night I was still doing work, and I was always thinking about it. And one of the things that really struck me in that manifesto was they make a comment about, we're not people who just read technical books. They don't just read O'Reilly manuals or something like that. And that's something that struck me because at this point in my life, it's something that I realized actually recently, that like I've kind of boxed myself into this very developer-oriented corner and have closed off all of these other avenues of my life and these avenues of interest where I've been putting down the O'Reilly books and I've been picking up the Kingkiller Chronicles and whatever other reading I've been missing out on.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. There's probably 3 points I want to make. I'll try to make them quickly. The first one was to Edward's.
I suspect they're going to be boring.
Very. They're going to be mostly just about me, no one else, not how it affects anyone else. The first one would be, it's funny that this term like 501, that's probably not, even in that video, maybe what I was talking about, because the timing is kind of interesting. If someone sat on Hacker News all day, we might consider them enthusiastic. And if they left at 6 o'clock and just stayed on all day, I don't know that that's someone that I would find inspiring to me, and like that I'd want to work with, even though we might consider them enthusiastic about their job because of their behavior. The second point, and it's more to your, Paul's, is I wouldn't expect, I don't want to say the people I want to work with, but people that would inspire me and like make me want to be better at developing, because I want to separate developing from a job. I wouldn't expect people to go home after 5 o'clock and think about their job as much as maybe be looking into something they're interested in, and it might happen to be around development. I think we should make that differentiate. There's a difference between geeking out just about something that happens to be part of your job, because I feel lucky that some of my interests are aligned with my job. But I don't think I would spend hours of the night, every night anyway, thinking about client work and how I'm going to do this as much as the things I'm interested in. And the third thing is, I think it is, I brought this up on the board yesterday, but I think it is kind of personality based. Like I'm kind of a nerd and a geek, and I just get into things. And so when I get home, I might be reading about, but it might be how to smoke a brisket, and I'll be consumed by it for 24 hours. I'll be reading books, checking out blogs. Sometimes it just might happen to be something around development or some new technology, but that's my personality, is just to get into it. And then I want to know everything about it. And then as fast as it came on, it goes away, and I'm on to the next thing, which could be snowboarding, or it could be something else, or a new song I'm going to learn on my guitar. So I think there is certainly a personality piece to it, as well as what I want to get into next after everyone's had a chance to comment here is on opportunity. And do we see that some people, like some of the developers that maybe we're considering now, we'll keep using the term 501, but maybe the meaning we've kind of identified here, that it's more about just doing the bare minimum at your job each day. just to get by, as opposed to like what time you're leaving and how much effort you're putting in. And that is it a lack of opportunity that kind of turns someone into that, or feel like they're not appreciated at their job, so then instead in turn they're not going to try as hard as maybe they would if they had a better opportunity, or is it personality based, and some people are wired to be a certain way and some people aren't?
Yeah, so this segues into the topic that when I first said I wanted to like sit down and have a conversation, this is the thing I wanted to talk about, because it kind of turned into this discussion of the 501 developer mentality, because that pejorative term or that concept I felt was something that had been brought up and applied, but it turned into a conversation about that, but I brought it up as kind of a side note. The real thing is, for me especially, as a consultant in particular, but as a developer in general, I have to work with people that are not enthusiastic and are just doing the bare minimum in order to not get fired, essentially. And so how do we encourage those people to be better? How do we deal with them? And what's making them that way is definitely something that I'm interested in. But unfortunately, I don't necessarily have the answer for that. I think that that's something that we all have to deal with constantly. There's usually at least one person in every organization that is like that and is in some position where I can't affect whether they work on my stuff or not. And they cause problems and slow me down or slow everyone down, and needing to be able to have a way to deal with that. I think, like you said, identifying where they're coming from and why they're behaving that way is the first step. But I'm not sure that I know.
Yeah, I would agree that there's probably no one. Each case is different, and like you said, sometimes it's just a fact of your job that you can't control. I don't know. I think it's interesting. Like you brought up, we're consultants, and so everything we're going to talk about is kind of framed in that mentality that we're brought in to get a job done, usually as quickly as possible at kind of a high premium. And we're going to work with people on the client side. We're going to have people from our own side, and all those personalities need to mesh to solve a problem. And usually when we start, it's a very specific problem, and there's a contract that indicates we're not done until we do that.
I found that I'm not very inspiring.
I'd have to agree with that.
and I don't, I've ran into a number of people that through my various positions were not passionate, were not excited, weren't developing themselves, and it had nothing to do with how many hours they were or weren't putting in. It had to do with how they were looking at the work they were being given, and like how they were considering their position in general as some sort of cog in a machine that's only going to be good at doing one particular thing. But one thing that's maybe tangentially related is, you brought up the fact that we're consultants, and so a lot of this is viewed through that lens. It's a totally different atmosphere if you're at a product company, or if you're at, if you're IT for a large company, if you're the tech team for a large company, and you're not a consultant, because some of the, I realized that the manifesto is supposed to be somewhat whimsical, but some of the things on there were about not contributing to open source contributing to open source projects, writing blogs and things of that nature. As a consultant see the thing that they're selling is the people and the time of their people. And to be able to do that, there has to be, tangible evidence that these people are worth paying for. And so how does that evidence get created? It gets created by things like having blogs exposed, having people who contribute to open source projects or who speak at conferences, having people who are writing up white papers. And I would say I agree that I think in the context of that manifesto, what was being said, and now I'm putting words into the author of a document that I just discovered yesterday. I think what was meant is that they're not spending their free time doing these things. So there's sort of a question of, if a consultancy's product is the people and their time, should time be given to those people to market themselves if that is an important part of positioning the people in the consultancy? Should the company be allocating time for activities like writing blogs and contributing to open source projects and things of that nature?
And I would say even beyond that, if your company is giving you time, does that lead to you wanting to do it more and taking more of an interest in it? That maybe it does become part of your free time as well. It's just another thing that you're into. It shouldn't be all encompassing, but I wonder if that's a side effect.
Right. It's like we do these videos, and I don't do it because the company came in and told me to do it. I do it because I find it enjoyable, and I find the conversations enjoyable, and the editing experience enjoyable, as poor as I am at it.
Paul's comment about letting us, giving consultants time to kind of build the brand by building themselves is it reminds me a lot of Google's old 20% system. I know they don't use it anymore for any number of reasons, but this kind of falls into that same space where in the Google 20% system, essentially they were being given time to build Google, to build new products for Google. And since at a consultancy, the human beings are the product, giving the human beings time to build themselves is essentially what we're talking about. And it falls under, it's different, but it seems very similar in the end. I understand why we're not necessarily going to do that in consulting companies, why we don't see consulting companies investing in their employees that way, because one of the ways that you build yourself is by working. And just purely having clients on your resume, having that experience, and then being able to demonstrate it in person, one-on-one with a potential client is kind of a good enough almost. In a lot of ways, we are improving. Now, maybe there is an opportunity for us to improve more by giving the individuals at your consulting firm time to build their, like the manifesto says, build their personal brand. But you are building that brand just by working with people. I regularly hear that people working in consulting industry, a lot of people perceive them just by talking to them as having way more experience than somebody who sat down at one company and worked on, say, their website for 5 years, because they were working on one tech stack with one group of people learning how to do one thing in one vertical.
Guys, I'm gonna have to drop in 2 minutes. Unfortunately, I gotta get back to the training thing. Can we do a part 2 though? I think we should try to cut this up. But there's some good meat here.
Yeah, I want to talk about that stuff. I also, at some point, wanted to loop back to a comment that Paul made earlier. I'd probably have to listen to the audio to remember exactly what that was. But we should do a part 2, I think.
That sounds good. Edward, thanks for bringing all this up. It's pretty cool. I think it's a good subject to broach because we all tiptoe around it sometimes.